Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second part of our interview with Glenn Greenwald. That's Glenn with two N's. I saw you on Laura Ingram's show, and what I loved about it was you tell the you go on Fox News, and they want you to come on Fox News to bash CNN, which you do correctly, but you also bash Fox News while on Fox News, which is, you never see that, and you did it. I saw it once before Lee Camp did it, but you were great at it, and she was reduced to just making noises like and it was so funny. So I can't believe that. So what do you think about it? I know you take criticism for going on Fox News. Now, I used to be one of those guys, too. I would criticize people for going on Fox News. And then I saw you with Laura Ingraham, and I was like, no, maybe this is better that you go on, because the people you really need to reach are those people, and they never get to hear this point of view. So maybe that's a good idea. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's a little bit in tension with what we were just talking about, right? Like, you want to keep people that are horrible at a distance so that they don't get humanized. At the same time, it's really interesting because after 2016, there was all this talk about why did fake news become so potent, and why don't people trust the media? Why are they willing to believe, you make up some fake media name and no one's ever heard of it before, and they'll just trust that and spread it more than something that comes from the New York Times or CNN, which they inherently distrust. And I think one of the main reasons is because the media has become so tribalistic, so polarized, like you're either on this side or this side, that Democrats and liberals only trust MSNBC and certain nice, pretty people on CNN like Jake Tapper or Anderson Cooper. And then conservatives only trust Fox News. So if you have, conservatives over here and liberals over here only listening and talking to one another, of course they're going to live in different worlds. And that's because nobody can make a claim to credibility for the reason that I just said. No host can go on MSNBC and question the Trump-Russia narrative because they're going to get fired or they're going to get turned off from the TV. No one on Fox can go and affirm the Trump-Russia narrative because the same thing is going to happen. So one of the things I've tried to do since Trump's election is be this just kind of person who can be counted on to say what I really think, independent or irrespective of who it's going to piss off. And what that's done is it's given me credibility with an audience that usually just tunes out to anybody who isn't on Fox News. And that's the right-wing audience of people who aren't huge hardcore Trump fanatics. They know that I'm still left-wing. They know that, I'm going to attack Israel, that I'm going to defend Muslims, that I'm going to denounce Islamophobia, that I'm against all kinds of things that they favor. But they also know that I'm willing to call bullshit on stories, even if those stories harm Trump, even if it angers and alienates Democrats when doing so. As a result, I can now have access to the Fox audience to tell them things that they're never going to otherwise hear. The other day, 2 weeks ago, Laura Ingraham posted went on Fox and made a false claim about the Pulse attack and the prosecution of Omar Mateen's wife. She said falsely that the wife should be prosecuted because she had gone to Pulse to case Pulse with Omar Mateen, which never happened. And so I tweeted at her and I said, the last time I was on your show, you told me if you ever said anything false and I brought it to your attention, you would retract it and apologize. Well, here you just did. And an hour later, she went on Twitter and she said, you're absolutely right. I tracked what I said. The wife of Omar Mateen never went to Pulse and never cased Pulse. So I'm glad that I have, at least in some circles, the perception that even though they don't agree with me ideologically, that I can be trusted journalistically to say what's true and have influence within that circle, independent of the fact that I have a different ideology. And they know that. And I think it's very healthy and important for journalists to be able to do that.
I agree. And I just saw our good friend from Secular Talk, Kyle Kalinske, on Fox News. It was hilarious, because he wouldn't play into their narrative and he just kept spewing facts that they didn't want to hear. And the host didn't know how to handle it because he wasn't that good. So it was funny. Did you see that spot that Kyle did on Fox?
No, I didn't. I definitely want to see Kyle on Fox. I didn't see that.
You should check it out. It's really funny. All right, so now I want to go back to, can you explain real quickly about, you got Why am I blank? Let's skip to this because I'm blanking on a name for some reason.
Are you okay over there, Jimmy?
No, not really.
Well, people still ask the two ends.
Oh, Glenn, I promised everyone I would ask you, what is with the second N?
The second N of my name? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that my mother named me after John Glenn, the fucking astronaut, and that was his name.
Okay.
I don't think it's that uncommon either. There's been like actors like Glenn Ford who have two N's in their name. I think it's kind of a 50-50 proposition. I don't think it's super exotic.
Okay. I mean, I have two M's in my name too, so it's just, but for me, that's just because the second one means it's good. And, but with Glenn, it's just like Glenn, like, oh, okay, I got it. Let's talk briefly about,
I would like to say though that I have done probably, I don't know how many interviews in my journalism career, certainly hundreds, probably thousands, and had thought that I had been asked every question, and yet I had never been asked that one until right now. So kudos to you on that.
That's what you get when you come to the YouTube, baby. So I want to ask you about, there's been a problem with or a perceived problem with people divulging information to The Intercept, and then the authorities finding out who those people are, giving you classified information. So can you talk about what happened in those two instances?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm a little bit constrained in what I can say, given that there are now two separate criminal prosecutions against two individuals who have been alleged to have leaked classified information to The Intercept. And obviously, the number one priority when you're in that situation as a media outlet is that you never want to say anything that could even remotely have a chance of helping the government prosecute those people. So even though journalists should be extremely transparent, there's obviously an exception when being transparent might harm people. And that's the case here. But I can say some things about it that I think are important and informative. There's a lot of bullshit around about this. There's a lot of lying. There's a lot of myths. So I'm happy to clear it up. So let's just set the context for a minute. As I'm sure most of your listeners know, The Intercept is not the only media outlet who has had sources prosecuted for leaking classified information to it. In fact, one of the most condemnable attributes of the Obama administration is that they went on a prosecution binge against leakers, and they prosecuted more leakers under the Espionage Act than all prior presidents combined. In fact, 3 times the number, I believe. They got close to 3 times the number, certainly more than double. It included sources from the New York Times, from the Wall Street Journal, from the Baltimore Sun, from Associated Press, ABC News. So it isn't like The Intercept is standing alone and having our sources investigated and prosecuted. This is a fixation on the part of first the Obama DOJ and now the Jeff Sessions-led Justice Department to try and prevent journalism from taking place by criminalizing the news gathering process by investigating sources and prosecuting sources. So if you're angry about this, about sources going to prison or being prosecuted, you should direct your ire not to us, the journalists, who are trying hard to uncover secret government programs so that we can inform the public about them. But you should direct them at the government that is trying to criminalize journalism by scaring the shit out of anyone in government who thinks about disclosing classified information by going on a prosecution binge. Now, having said that, last year in the prosecution of Reality Winner, who is accused of leaking a top secret NSA memo to The Intercept. The Intercept made a series of very significant mistakes in how it handled that information. Obviously not confirming whether she was the source or not, but the information that we did get that reporters of ours ended up reporting on was handled quite poorly. And our editor-in-chief, Betsy Reed, wrote an article acknowledging those mistakes, talking about some of the reasons they happened, consistent with the obligation not to harm the source. And the parent company of The Intercept, First Look Media, is paying all of her legal fees to make sure she has the most top-flight, white-collar criminal legal representation that she can possibly have. So nobody doubts that there were mistakes made by The Intercept, serious ones. I think The Intercept owned up to them in every way that it could. And I also think there's a very, very serious question about whether it was those mistakes that led the Justice Department and the FBI to actually catch her, or whether they would have caught her anyway, just regardless of what we did. But I think one thing that's really important to realize is that the FBI and the Justice Department and the intelligence community hate The Intercept with a burning passion for reasons that are obvious, which is that we have continuously published top secret documents and attacked and criticized the intelligence community and the government. So in that case of Reality Winner, they purposely filed documents to try and undermine our credibility and to try and blame us by creating the worst possible picture of what happened in a way that would harm our reputation. And it's amazing to me how many people on the left who pride themselves on being skeptical and cynical of the FBI and the Justice Department under Donald Trump, led by Jeff Sessions, suddenly decided that in this particular case, everything they uttered was gospel and should never be questioned, and decided to believe every word of it. In this second case that just happened last month, where there was a person who was the subject of a search warrant, and the FBI and the Justice Department, again, in their search warrant, tried to blame The Intercept. In this case, there is zero valid reason to believe that The Intercept did anything wrong. Unlike in the case from last year, when there were serious fuck-ups, in this case, The Intercept did nothing wrong or nothing to help them find the source. The theory is that once The Intercept got leaked to it, secret documents, The Intercept filed a FOIA request asking for those documents in order basically to have gotten the documents in a way that didn't come from the source, so that we could publish them and protect the source, so that if anyone says, where did you get them from, we could say, oh, we filed a FOIA request for it. The theory that people are using to try and attack us and blame us for this, that makes no sense if you just think about it for 3 seconds, is that by notifying the government with the FOIA request that we got these documents, or that we were aware of these documents, it notified the government that someone had leaked them to us, otherwise we wouldn't have known about them, to ask for them, and that's what then triggered the leak investigation. Here's why this is so fucking stupid. Once we got the documents from the source, the reason the source gave us these documents is because the source wanted us to report on the documents and publish them. So instead of filing a FOIA request, if we had just done what the source wanted us to do, which was write about the documents and publish them, by definition, the government would have known right at that moment that someone leaked us the documents, because we were fucking publishing them and reporting on them.
That's right.
So the FOIA request that we filed didn't tell the government anything that they wouldn't have already known once we published and reported on the documents. It's just this weird combination of the Trump FBI and DOJ trying to harm our reputation because they hate us for reasons I'm proud of, and then some weird people on the left who just love any kind of conspiracy theory, who are believing everything the Trump DOJ and FBI are saying about us in order to claim or imply, I guess, that either we're incompetent or we're actually like purposely trying to help the Trump administration uncover the identity of whistleblowers. The Reality Winner case was a fuck up. The Intercept admitted that. The journalists involved have all been through training sessions and other things because of it. We're paying for her legal fees because of it. In this last case, this is just a byproduct of the Trump Justice Department obsessed with punishing whistleblowers and trying to harm The Intercept. And in this case, The Intercept did nothing wrong.
Okay, well, I appreciate you explaining that. Yes, that does make sense. Yeah,
it's so obvious. It's so obvious.
Yes. I also want to talk briefly about. I saw your debate over treason with James Risen. Now, James Risen, great journalist, who's himself prosecuted by the Obama administration. So that's why it was so disheartening, right, to see him play so fast and loose with those terms. And we covered it on this show. We did a video about it, and it was about the frustrations. The way I looked at it, it was about the frustrations of these kind of conversations around Russiagate. That it's like trying to debate Jell-O, right? They're always moving. They always move the goalposts. They can change that. They can say they agree with you 1 second, and then the next second they contradict what they just said they agreed with. And so that was happening constantly in the interview you did, or the debate you did with them. And so I did a thing on that. Now, how does something like that, how did you feel about that? Because I felt like it's not very constructive, but maybe it was at the end of the day, because smart people can watch it and they can see through it. But so do you think it was constructive? Let's just start there.
So I think that it's important at first to acknowledge how polarizing and divisive the Trump-Russia story specifically, and just the Trump presidency in general, has been for the left, broadly speaking. So I feel like one of the things that happened was that The Intercept became very identified with expressing skepticism about this story from the beginning, because in particular, I was so vocal about it. And then Jeremy Scahill was sometimes quite vocal about it as well. And we became the two most prominent faces of The Intercept. So the idea became that The Intercept is sort of heretics committing blasphemy when it comes to the Trump-Russia story. And so, there's 60 or so journalists now at The Intercept. We've grown a lot. And a lot of them believe the Trump-Russia story. And I think some people felt uncomfortable with the fact that we were just so identified with this skepticism. Now, one of the reasons why I did the thing with Ryzen is because, it is tiresome, and I'm always glad for the opportunity to debunk it, to just hear the lies about what I've said. So there are just people, and I know I'm going to go to my grave with people believing this because so many people have told them it's true, even though it's an obvious lie, that I was saying from the start the Russia story is a hoax, that Putin Russia wasn't involved in the hacking. I never said any of that. In fact, I've always said the opposite. I've always said, of course it's possible that Russia and Putin and the Russians hacked into these email inboxes, because this is the sort of thing that the Russians and the Americans and pretty much every large power do to each other, and infinitely worse, and have done for decades. So I would never put it past. It's not like, oh my God, the Russians are way too ethical to hack it. I mean, I worked on a story for a year and a half that won every major journalism in the world, showing how the US government hacks into fucking everything. So it's not like I think the Russians wouldn't hack it. Was never that. It was a journalistic principle, and a principle that I thought we all learned from the Iraq War, that we don't believe government claims until there's evidence accompanying it. And that was it. Now, I think one of the reasons Jim Ryzen is a journalistic hero of mine. As you said, he's been a great journalist for a long time. He's fought the government. He was threatened with prosecution for years. He never backed down. He's like a journalist at his core. I think that made him radicalized. But I think one of the reasons why The Intercept was excited to hire him, aside from the fact that he's a great journalist, is because he was going to sort of be the one to dispel the Glenn Greenwald, Jeremy Scahill infection by coming forward and saying, no, the Trump-Russia story is real and we're on board with it. So let me just finish this point by saying this. I get every day, people saying oh, you're going to be on the wrong side of history, and can't you admit now that you've been proven so wrong, Mueller proved wrong. There's still no indictments that allege conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians that rises. No one's been criminally charged with colluding with Russia. But more to the point, this is what I kept asking Ryzen, and I never got an answer, despite the fact that we took an hour, and I know we could have taken a month, and I still wouldn't get an answer because there is no answer. The theory of the U.S. government going back to the end of 2016 when the Department of Homeland Security issued its report, and then into January 2017 when it issued another one because the first one was such a joke, is that not that the Russians, that the hackers who hacked into John Podesta and the DNC's email are Russian origin. No, it went way beyond that. The theory is that Vladimir Putin himself ordered the email inboxes of John Podesta and the DNC hacked. He, went into his James Bond villain cave at the bottom of the Kremlin, and he convened all the big burly Russian hackers around a table, and he's John Podesta and the DNC, I want that he ordered it. What evidence is there for any of that? Not just what is the best evidence, what evidence exists that there's any of that, let alone that the Trump campaign worked with and collaborated and conspired with the Russians to do that, which is what led to the whole controversy in the special counsel in the first place. There is still no evidence of that. So if you want to say, hey, there's some analyses that you can do that show that the origins of the hack came from Russia or from Russian people, I think that's debatable. There's certainly some more evidence now than there was a year and a half ago. But the idea that this was like a coordinated, centralized Russian attack on the United States is still totally unproven. And even if it were proven, what would the implications be given how well within the norms that behavior is for how the Russians and the U.S. and tons of other countries try and sabotage one another all the time. So the level of hysteria and the claims that have been made are so wildly out of proportion to what the evidence actually demonstrates and what rational thinking permits you to embrace that I'm always glad for the opportunity, including that frustrating debate that we had with one of my journalistic heroes, Jim Risen, to just demand that the proponents of this theory articulate their evidentiary basis for it, because I think it's always fruitful when you demand that.
So you and I have seen people that we respect immensely go down this rabbit hole of no evidence and at the top of their lungs screaming Russia, right? And so I've tried, I mean, from Keith Olbermann to everybody, right? So I've tried to figure out what this is. And what this is I just think that Trump presses on their lizard brain somehow, the way Barack Obama pressed on Sean Hannity's. And they just don't, and they just all, Ron Placone on my show says often that I detest Trump as much as anybody, but I'm not going to allow him to rob me of my critical thinking skills. And it seems like it's so disheartening to me because, like, when I get on an airplane, I want to know that that pilot is smarter than me and he's competent, right? But now it's like the people who I look to who are smarter than me aren't. And I know how dumb I am, so it makes me feel like nobody's going to save us. Do you know what I mean? And why do you think that so many people that we respect are allowing themselves to go down this Russiagate and without any evidence whatsoever, considering how detrimental it is to the left?
And potentially dangerous for the U.S. and for the world, given that the U.S. and the Russians still have thousands of missiles with nuclear tips pointed at their major cities with very archaic hair trigger systems that have on many occasions in the past, at least 2 or 3 really scary ones, come close to annihilating the species. It seems like you want to be kind of careful, not reckless and deranged when it comes to heightening tensions between these two mammoth powers. So, I think it's actually 2 things. Number one, I think it's really important to be mindful of what a disorienting and traumatizing event Trump's victory was. Like, genuinely.
I know.
If you look at, like the New York Times and the Huffington Post and 538, all the data geniuses, Nate Silver was a little bit of an aberration at the end. He started getting a little more cautious. I think that was because he wanted to make sure the Democrats didn't get complacent, but let's assume it was because he really saw statistical things that made him more cautious. Still, I think he was saying it was 75 or 80% likely that Clinton would win. And the New York Times and the Huffington Post were everywhere from like 92% to 97 or 98%. So all the people that we're told to trust when it comes to telling us what the future is likely to hold, given not, looking into a crystal ball, but using their math genius skills to look at the quote unquote data, were all telling us that it was basically guaranteed that Trump was going to lose and Clinton was going to win. And everybody thought that going into election night. On top of which, all of the things that we're trained to believe from the time that we're young about what the United States is completely unravel when we see some like narcissistic game show host, evil clown who has all kinds of, unstable behaviors and psychological complexities that are untreated and very obvious, march into the fucking White House and sit at the Oval Office and have the nuclear code to the football and be the face of the United States to the world. That's also really traumatizing. It's kind of like, it would almost be, and I've used this example before, like if we woke up tomorrow, there are certain things we just count on in terms of how the world works. Like we assume when we wake up in the morning that gravity is still going to be a functional force, and so all of the objects will continue to remain on the floor, including ourselves. But imagine if we woke up tomorrow when gravity, for whatever reason, was no longer effective, it would completely disorient us, right? We would be like, oh my God, what the fuck? How do I understand my world now? I need some way to understand what's coming, like what happened and what's next. How do I make sense of all of this? And this is what religion has done for centuries, right? Is it's given people a unifying theory to understand a complicated world. And so in the aftermath of the Trump victory, no matter how smart you are or whatever, as an American, as somebody who has a conception of what your society is, as someone who wants to believe that things are predictable and that you can understand them, to have something like this happen, people craved an explanation, something that would let them make sense of the events that were so disillusioning and confusing and befuddling and dislodging. And one of the things that helps in these cases is some unifying conspiracy theory. Like, no, we're going to tell you exactly what happened. It's nothing complicated. It's not like a series of political shifts that have taken place over 30 years because of the displacement of people's jobs through free trade and neoliberalism and the global order. It's not like seething anger and hatred and resentment for all kinds of elites to the point where they're ready to burn it. It's none of those complicated things that you have to like hurt your brain thinking about how to fix. It's a really simple, it's just read a Tom Clancy novel and you'll understand it. Basically, it was the Ruskies' fault. The KGB fucked with our election because they're this evil dictator sitting in the Kremlin in Moscow with Red Square and all the things you've seen before that have scared you in movies and for 7 decades of Cold War propaganda. That's why it happened. So it's a unifying theory. It simplifies things. It makes people feel like they can get a grasp of what happened. And it also alleviates ourselves of blame, right? Like, it's not the Democratic Party that's completely fundamentally fucked up that caused, like this ridiculous loser like Trump to beat them. It's not that the United States is fucked to its core that it could elect somebody like Donald Trump as president. No, it's a foreign villain who is to blame. It's Putin who's pulling all the strings, this like evil Rusky dictator. It just makes us feel better. It's like, oh, good. It's like we were the victims here. We weren't the ones who have to fix ourselves. So I think the combination of those two things, alleviating oneself of guilt and blame and the burden to fix, combined with the natural human desire that religions have exploited forever, to cling on to a simplifying, unifying theory to explain a complicated, confusing world, is why so many otherwise smart, reasoned, even skeptical people have turned Trump Russia into what it is, which is a religion. It's a religion. It's not allowed to be questioned. It's assumed to be true based on faith. And the people who reject it or deny it or question it or challenge it are treated exactly like heretics and blasphemers. That's exactly the framework that has arisen.
Yes, and so as much as those people had been traumatized by the election of Donald Trump, I am traumatized by their McCarthy smears and seeing it coming from people who I consider to be heroes. So that's traumatizing to me, and it makes me feel like if the burden of telling the truth about this stuff falls on people like me, it's way too late, and I guess I should pick out a spot in France and go buy a house or something. Or Canada, or something like that. Please make sure you're subscribed. It only takes a second. Make sure you're subscribed and click that bell so they give you a notice whenever we drop a video. And if you can become a patron, we give you hours of bonus material every week. Our next live show is June 30th in Portland, Oregon. And we do a super solid chat every Saturday. That's our live stream. You can ask us questions and we answer back. That's Saturdays at 2 p.m. Pacific. Plus, we're on Steam It. We're steaming it right now.